Hi everybody. Okay, so today I'm starting the first, I guess, of what you might call semi-autobiographical work. I say I'm hedging that because we, having talked about it, we being myself, one or two friends, I've elected to go with an academic approach. So instead of talking about people who were around or that type of thing, I'm going to be talking about one or two refereed pieces by people, public domain pieces by people that I knew and still know, and otherwise I'll be talking about figures who are like people that I know who have published and are in public domain. So the whole idea is to be very public domain. I'm not sure whether that is the way to go, but I think that's the appropriate way to go anyway. So let's just start with the left, where we've got my first book, which is St. Stephen's, my master's thesis on St. Stephen's School, Bombay, which no longer exists. Out of that, I'm very happy that some of the research from there, particularly the work on gun and dick, the work on the vocabulary of the students, is still extant, even though and interestingly enough still used in New Zealand, even though the school itself has long been closed. So and there is a move now to reopen the school, and we're looking at that. Okay, so that was my very first book, and it's an MA thesis. Very pleased with that thesis, a first class thesis, and just while I'm at it, thanks to everybody who was involved in that, my supervisors and so forth. Okay, so moving to papers on language, that's my most recent book, and that comes from a series of papers given at Cambridge University, and I'm very, very happy with that book because it, in a sense, you can see those two going really over a 50-year span pretty well. And half a century, goodness gracious me. And again, coming back to the idea of the school language, the language that the students used at St. Stephen's, and the interesting language that I think sustained over half a century. There you go, the beginning and the end, goodness gracious. Okay, so then moving across the window, Keith Sinclair's Halfway Around the Harbour is a very good book, actually, really interesting book, and what fascinated me about the book was that he's a generation ahead, maybe two generations ahead of me. Although I once went I was going to go to a lecture of his that he was giving at Oxford, and I happened to be at Oxford at the time, and Dan Davin, who I knew, said, "Oh, you better not go to that, Peter, you'll be late." And Keith didn't, well, I wasn't sure whether it was Keith or Dan or whoever it was, didn't want people showing up late, so I didn't go. But I remember him as obviously the leader of New Zealand history at Auckland University, and of course he and Bruce Biggs were very tight. And Bruce Biggs was the man who ran the Māori Studies department at Auckland. And I never knew really Bruce Biggs because I never studied Māori. I mean, it's very odd for me because, again, in my biography, I've been a professional speaker of Māori for the last 25 years or so on the radio. So I'm a strange one in that I never actually studied it at university, but I speak the language. So interesting with Bruce Biggs and Keith, that neither of them, I don't think, actually got around to speaking the language, but both of them were very, very important in the development of Māori and of New Zealand identity. So, and also the other interesting thing about Sinclair and Biggs is that they were both products of Mount Albert Grammar, and I will be referring to an excellent monograph by Professor Peter Phillips, who is a friend of mine, and he was also at Mount Albert Grammar. So I think the Sinclair-Biggs situation at Mount Albert Grammar, where they're both librarians, is something that I'll stay with because a lot of people that I knew and still know and have to do with actually went to that school. So that's going to be my intro into that, and I'll be talking about Sinclair's Halfway Around the Harbour quite extensively. It's a pretty good book. Moving across the the window, we come to Headlands. Now, then Headlands was a pretty important meeting of arts commentators at the University of Auckland all the way back in 1990. And I'm going to be coming back to that again and again over the course of these talks, because it was a very, very, I guess, some sort of bridgehead, I suppose. Yeah, things shifted a little bit, I think, after Headlands. Moving across, we have Iwi Station, which is the story of the Iwi Station that I work for, the Iwi radio station, and not that particular station, but the idea of the Iwi Station. And in New Zealand, and there's 25 or more Iwi stations, and quite an important, I think, matter. So I'm talking about the history. It's also got some autobiographical stuff in it too. Just there's one chapter there about what I do on the radio. And then right on the far side, I've got the biography of a man called Paul Henry. And I'll put those two together just as contrasts, because Paul Henry, of course, was a fairly strong character in local radio and television nationally. And I think if you put the Iwi Station book alongside his book, you get an idea of just how puny my own role is relative to someone like Paul Henry in this general scheme of things in New Zealand. But also just how different things are. So as time goes by, I'll be referring to that book again, talking about the difference, because going out every day, which I do in Māori, about New Zealand and about things in New Zealand, I suppose, and the wide world. I like to talk about the wide world in Māori is quite different to what I think to what Paul Henry is doing in English, and has been doing in his broadcasting life, which is Paul Henry, Paul Holmes. These people are really major figures in the English-speaking world here in New Zealand. So I'm trying to, I guess, get a handle on English-speaking, Māori-speaking broadcasting, and in a sense, it's, I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking, but I haven't actually seen people do this type of thing. So we'll see how that goes. But there you go. That's the set of books that will be the starter for my almost autobiographical work, because there's no actual autobiography. And thank you, Kerry, one or two others who want to see an autobiography. You're not going to see it, at least not this time around. And I'm not going to be mentioning people's names that I knew, unless they've written to me, or unless, as with the Peter Phillips work, that is public domain material. It's also Sheree O'Neill's autoethnography, which I marked, and I've talked to people at the AUT, it was an AUT thesis, about that, coming out of Auckland, one of the Auckland grammar school, girls' grammar schools, and that is a very, very good sounding board, I think, for me, because I think talking about males and females, the Keith Sinclair, Bruce Biggs situation in Mount Albert Grammar, that will do on the male side. And I think Sheree O'Neill and her story of growing up in Mount Eden and Central Auckland, the ballet, the incredible atmosphere. I like to call it a tight, very tight, structured atmosphere in both Sinclair and Biggs' Auckland Grammar and Sheree O'Neill's grammar school. Compared, say, to my own background at Manorua High School, which I would say was loose. I mean, it's just a pretty rough kind of a start. But basically, I'll be using that. Those two books, Keith Sinclair's book and Sheree O'Neill's doctoral thesis, as sounding boards, as well as Peter Phillips's excellent story of his life, coming from Papakura through to Mount Albert Grammar, and then going on to Birmingham, Yale, and other places. You're with Peter Cleave.